Welcome into TYT's The Conversation. It is your host, Adrienne Lawrence, and I am now joined by former federal prosecutor and CNN senior legal analyst Laura Coates, who also happens to be the author of a new book, Just Pursuit: A Black Prosecutor's Fight for Fairness. Welcome in, Laura.
I'm so glad I'm here. Thank you, Adrienne, for having me.
Yes, thanks for joining us, especially since it is the 1-week anniversary of your book launch. Congrats.
Thank you. It's flown by, but as you know, it's a labor of love to write it. And so having the baby out in the world is really surreal.
Yes, I bet it is, especially right now. And I know you have a very impressive background in terms of your credentials, also a wealth of experience and knowledge as being a prosecutor and being in the justice system and, providing those hard-hitting facts on CNN. But I really am wondering what inspired you to share a lot of your story and your journey with Just Pursuit.
It is deeply personal, and I thank you for all the compliments, and they're right back at you as well, Adrienne. And I gotta tell you, I think people expect me to write a book, and really all lawyers, right, to write a book that is a legal textbook you'd find in a law school classroom. Esoteric, very highbrow, the idea of thinking about a Supreme Court case and then figuring out how it's contextually a part of our universe. But I really wanted to make sure that it was a deeply personal narrative memoir where we personified what the issues we're all talking about. And I think that storytelling is the most compelling form of information. It's one in which people can see themselves in it. They can vicariously experience. I often talk about, as part of my career, what the law is and how it's interpreted. But I want people to understand what the law feels like and what justice is and what it is not, so that when they speak truth to power, they actually know what the truth is.
Wow, that is a very powerful thing, especially being a part of the legal system and knowing how it should work. And so to make this accessible to all and also to have that storytelling angle is such an incredibly just impactful thing. And I know that Just Pursuit isn't just about storytelling, that it also has an edge of activism in it. And so if you could tell me, what can readers really take away with them from reading Just Pursuit?
Well, I think that education is a form of activism. I really believe that when people have and are privy to information, and I mean true information, and allowing you to see the facts as they unfold. So often in our society, we've got things that are objectively true that become Rorschach tests, and people will see what they want to see. And I think it's important for people's perspectives, but I also want people to understand that if you have the information, if you understand that in a lot of ways, our legal system is striving to be a justice system. It's more legal, however, than just in many arenas. And while there are extraordinary moments of triumph and humanity, they are often overshadowed by the fact that the pursuit of justice can actually increase and also create injustice. And I want people to understand what that looks like. And I think in our own individual lives, we all battle our own personal battles of allegiance where we don't have the luxury, I know I don't, of walking into a room, be it a courtroom or a boardroom, and shedding facets of my identity. I bring them with me. I bring my lived experience as a Black woman, as a wife, as a mother, as a human being, as a student of history. And I bring that with me to better inform the choices that I would make in the courtroom. And it didn't make it easy, but it made it such that I knew that I was pursuing fairness and fighting for fairness. And sometimes my moral compass pointed in one direction and our laws point in a different direction. And people have to reconcile that chasm and figure out what we want America to be on paper and in reality.
Yes, absolutely. And being a lawyer myself, I understand those situations where essentially, your moral compass may go one way, but the law goes another way. And it is something you have to reconcile within yourself. And also in recognizing as being a part of the criminal justice system, knowing that it is laden with bias and it's not as fair and as just as essentially our founding fathers would have wanted it to be, so to speak.
But meant it to be.
Yeah,
that's wanted it to be, yes.
It's definitely for some of us. And so I was wondering, at kind of what moment did you have that awakening or that experience where you realized, hey, this is going to be very difficult and this is going to be challenging at times?
I write about in the book that there was a transition from being a civil rights attorney in the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice and working on voting rights. And it was a foregone conclusion, that I was a champion of the people, so to speak, those who had been marginalized, those whose civil rights had been infringed. And your question of allegiance just was not there. But then going under that same umbrella of the Department of Justice and now being a criminal prosecutor, it was a very different experience of how people perceived me. Although my victims were overwhelmingly Black and brown, because the defendants were also Black and brown, it seemed as though I was being challenged as to whose side I was really on, and the stark contrast between my, profession of the civil rights and what I wanted to have happen, and my role being a person and Black woman that people pick the man to be in, so to speak. And that's a very jarring experience from day one. When I compare it in many respects, Adrienne, to knowing something and then understanding it. You know what disproportionate impact is conceptually. You know what disparate impact is. You know about mass incarceration. You know all these things. But then it's like sitting on a train platform, and you know the power of a locomotive, you know its ferocity, you know the pistons will fire, and you know that the strength it will bring. But when you're on that platform and all of a sudden it whizzes past you, and you can feel in that instant what makes you want to take a step back and say, my God, now I understand the force I'm dealing with. That's what it was like going from the Civil Rights Division and understanding the law from a intellectual perch in some respects, and then experiencing what injustice looks like in the criminal context. It was jarring, but it's an eye-opening experience I bring the reader along with.
Yes, wow, that sounds like a hell of a journey, particularly as you mentioned, being a Black woman and seeing how the system can be unjust to people who look like us, and wondering what side am I on, and also knowing that the system has its essentially broken elements and how they impact people. I'm guessing it can be a lot, especially when you still know maybe that individual did commit a crime and they hurt someone. And thus you still have an obligation to seek justice. And if you could talk a little bit about that journey, that would be really impactful.
I think people have the understanding that justice is really binary, right? It's either a conviction or an acquittal, and that's somehow a destination. When in reality, there's so many aspects of this ecosystem of justice in America. And just in the idea that there's this fallacy that you can be civil rights oriented in only one position in a courtroom, or that Black and brown people are only entitled to be in certain roles within the justice system, either a defendant or a defense counsel. When in reality, we need to be in every area that justice touches, from police officers to the bench, to policymakers, to prosecutors, to defense counsel. We don't have a monopoly on crime, but when you see the way in which crimes are policed and of course prosecuted, it really requires us to have a deeper understanding. And make no mistake about it, I upheld my oath, and I feel overwhelmingly proud that I was given the opportunity to speak on behalf of the United States. But when I stood up and said Laura Coates on behalf of the people of the United States, that necessarily included the defendant. And that can be jarring to people to understand that it's not an us versus them. And I had every responsibility to protect that person's constitutional rights, to bring with the prosecution a healthy skepticism that questions what a police officer has said, whether the facts in fact will pan out to meet my burden of proof. And if we're just resting on our laurels and being the beneficiary of the kinds of benefits of doubt that are given to us as agents of the government or as members of law enforcement, we do a disservice. We do a disservice to the communities that are victimized, those that are prosecuted, and ultimately the people of the United States. And so all of that really comes into play when I think about the tension between knowing what your oath is and also knowing that it's the people of the United States and who that must necessarily include.
Yes, and I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand that, but that's part of the journey that we have. You go to law school, you pass the bar, you take an oath. And when you take that wholeheartedly and you do not, essentially, you don't let it waver in any way, it is something that just essentially, it helps you navigate the system and also perform your duties and your job. And so turning to your job, now, as largely this icon in the media, dealing with the traumas of the news cycle on that legal edge and angle, but also being a Black woman and a mother and being an attorney, it can be a lot, especially during times where we have this social upheaval and we have these essentially new era, new beginnings, George Floyd, these conversations, these situations we're seeing more and more. How are you navigating the system, knowing how it should work, and still being able to essentially do your job as a wife, a mother, and also as a legal analyst?
Well, first, I'm tickled that the word icon was in the same as my own name. I certainly am not in that category, but I do really appreciate the sentiment, and I thank you so much for saying that. I don't know that I always do it well in terms of the balancing act that we must all play, and I think that compartmentalizing is something that I sometimes grapple with, because there's a sense of armor that one must have not to allow everything to penetrate. And I would not be a human being if I told you that I can hear or watch the trials, or I can receive and process information like what happened to Elijah McClain, a young Black man just walking from the store to be given ketamine and then rendered brain dead. Me having these conversations and not feeling it in my soul, or watching over and over again as I'm commenting on the trial of Derek Chauvin, the murder of a man before our very eyes. And it does get to me. But I think to myself, perhaps selfishly, because of the different facets of my identity as a mother, as a human being, as a daughter, as a wife of a Black man, I think to myself, I would like to educate as a form of activism so that my own children don't experience what I am talking about. The conversations that I'm having with the country about what the law means and its interpretation, that these are ways in which we can avoid past being prologue. And I think it's a really important notion to have people realize that I'm a human being and I am fallible as anyone else. But if we take the opportunity to really educate ourselves, to peel back the curtains that so often protect the status quo and illuminate these issues, we will be in a better place. And I keep wondering, Adrienne, right now we pursue justice. What if one day we actually catch it? Then what a country we would really be.
Indeed, we would be. Oh, wow, just even the thought of that. But I know that we are going to be all the better for having your instruction, to having your word and sharing your voice. And everybody definitely go out there, pick up Just Pursuit, a Black prosecutor's fight for fairness. It's available everywhere books are sold. And is there anywhere people should follow you or get more information, Laura?
You can always follow me on Twitter and Instagram at @TheLauraCoates, and you can always listen to my daily SiriusXM POTUS show as well, weekdays 3 to 6 p.m. In my free time. I never stop talking, Adrienne. I never stop talking. So I'm glad to be with you, and I'm proud of the work you're doing, sis, and congratulations to you as well.
Thank you so much, Laura. Thank you for joining us, for sharing your written word with this world, and also for never stopping talking. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR, so those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.